What if everything you thought was ordinary about being human was actually the most terrifying thing in the universe?
When Marcus Chen agreed to participate in the Galactic Exchange Program, he expected cultural differences.
He didn't expect his alien roommate to faint at the sight of him sleeping. He didn't expect the entire dormitory to evacuate when he yawned.
And he certainly didn't expect to become the subject of emergency protocols simply for existing. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the cosmos isn't a weapon, a disease, or a natural disaster.
Sometimes it's just a college student from Earth trying to get 8 hours of sleep.
This is the story of how humanity's most basic survival mechanism became the galaxy's greatest nightmare, and how one confused exchange student accidentally redefined what it means to be the apex predator of the universe. Marcus Chen had always considered himself painfully average. At 22, he was a middling engineering student at Berkeley with brown hair that never cooperated, a tendency to oversleep, and the remarkable ability to survive entirely on instant ramen and energy drinks. When the Galactic Exchange Program accepted his application, he figured it was because they needed someone so unremarkable that he wouldn't accidentally cause an international incident.
He was wrong about the international part. Interplanetary was more accurate.
The shuttle ride to Kepler Station had been uneventful, filled mostly with other human exchange students comparing notes about their assigned roommates.
Sarah from MIT was rooming with a crystalline being called a Zeltar. James from Stanford had drawn a gas cloud entity known as a Vorthan.
Marcus had been assigned someone called Kethvar from the planet Helios Prime, species designation Helion. The cultural briefing had been sparse, mentioning only that Helioans were bipedal, oxygen-breathing, and considered highly intelligent by galactic standards.
Basically space elves, Sarah had joked, showing him a blurry photo from the species database.
The image revealed a tall, willowy figure with elongated limbs, large dark eyes, and skin that seemed to shimmer with an internal light.
Could be worse, Marcus had replied. At least he's not made of gas.
Now, standing in the corridor of Xenobiology Dormitory 7, Marcus wondered if he should have been more careful about what he wished for. The station was massive, a spinning wheel of metal and transparent aluminum that housed over 10,000 students from across the galaxy. The human section occupied a small slice of level 7, with each human paired with a non-human roommate as part of the cultural exchange initiative. The door to room 247C slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a space that was half familiar, half alien. One side looked like a standard dorm room from Earth, complete with a twin bed, desk, and dresser. The other side seemed to glow with soft, pulsing light emanating from what looked like crystalline formations growing from the walls. Strange symbols floated in mid-air above a workspace that defied several laws of physics Marcus thought he understood.
"You must be Marcus," came a voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze.
Marcus turned to see his roommate for the first time in person, and immediately understood why the cultural briefing had been so vague. Kethvar was beautiful in a way that made Marcus feel clumsy and primitive by comparison. Tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to contain stars, and those large, dark eyes that appeared to hold depths of knowledge Marcus couldn't fathom. Everything about the Helion spoke of elegance, refinement, and a civilization that had long ago transcended the crude necessities that still plagued humanity.
"That's me," Marcus said, hefting his single duffel bag. "Thanks for agreeing to room with a human.
I know we're probably not the most exciting species in the exchange program."
Kethvar's head tilted in what Marcus would learn was the Helion equivalent of a polite smile.
"On the contrary, humans are considered quite fascinating. Your species has only recently achieved space travel, yet you've already applied for membership in the Galactic Confederation. Most species require several millennia to develop such ambition." Marcus wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not, but he decided to take it as one.
"Well, we're definitely ambitious. Sometimes too much for our own good." "Indeed. I have read the preliminary reports on human psychology and behavior. Quite remarkable, really.
Your species seems to have developed a number of unique survival mechanisms." Kethvar moved to his side of the room with fluid grace, arranging some crystalline objects that hummed with soft harmonics. "I confess, I am curious to observe these mechanisms firsthand."
"Survival mechanisms?"
Marcus dropped his bag on his bed and started unpacking.
"Like what?"
"Oh, various things. Your ability to continue functioning despite severe injury, your tendency toward what your scientists call persistence hunting, your capacity for entering altered states of consciousness for extended periods.
Cathvar paused in his arrangement.
The briefing materials were somewhat vague, but they suggested that humans have retained a number of predatory characteristics despite your technological advancement.
Marcus looked up from folding his shirts. Predatory characteristics?
I mean, I guess we're omnivores, but I wouldn't really call humans predators.
We're more like really good at problem solving. Ah, modest as well. How very human. Cathvar's expression shifted to something Marcus couldn't quite read. I am certain I will learn much from our cohabitation. The next few hours passed pleasantly enough.
Cathvar proved to be an excellent conversationalist, eager to learn about Earth and human culture while sharing stories of Helios Prime. His planet, Marcus learned, was a world of perpetual twilight, where the Helioans had evolved to draw energy directly from stellar radiation. They were a peaceful species, having eliminated war, poverty, and disease over 1,000 years ago. Their society functioned as a collective consciousness of sorts, with individuals maintaining their autonomy while sharing knowledge and emotions through biotechnological networks.
It sounds like paradise, Marcus said as they shared dinner in the common area.
The station's food processors could replicate almost any dish from any known species, though Marcus had stuck with something that resembled pizza.
It is peaceful, Cathvar agreed, delicately consuming what looked like liquid starlight from a crystalline bowl. Perhaps too peaceful, some might say.
There are those among my people who believe we have become stagnant. That we have forgotten what it means to struggle, to overcome challenges through individual effort rather than collective harmony.
Is that why you joined the exchange program?
Partially. I wanted to understand what drives species like yours, species that still retain their fundamental survival instincts.
Your people fascinate the scientific community, you know.
Most species lose their aggressive tendencies once they develop advanced technology. But humans seem to have channeled that aggression into exploration, innovation, artistic expression.
Marcus chewed his pizza thoughtfully. We're not really that aggressive.
I mean, yeah, we have wars and stuff, but most humans just want to live their lives in peace.
Perhaps. But the capacity remains, does it not? The potential for violence, for competition, for what your philosophers call the will to survive at any cost? I guess. But that's just normal, isn't it? Every species must have some kind of survival instinct. Cathvar's large eyes seemed to shimmer with amusement. Oh, my dear Marcus.
I suspect you will find that very little about humanity is considered normal by galactic standards. As the artificial day cycle wound down, Marcus found himself genuinely liking his alien roommate. Cathvar was intelligent, curious, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about human culture. There had been a few awkward moments, like when Marcus had unconsciously cracked his knuckles and Cathvar had gone very still, or when Marcus had yawned and his roommate had stepped backward with what looked like alarm. But, overall, things were going better than expected. I should probably get some sleep, Marcus said as they returned to their room.
I've got interstellar engineering first thing tomorrow morning. Sleep? Cathvar paused in the doorway. Ah yes, the human regenerative cycle. How many hours do you typically require? About 8, usually. Sometimes more if I'm really tired.
Marcus pulled his pajamas from his dresser.
What about Helioans? Do you sleep? Not precisely.
We enter a state of reduced consciousness for approximately 2 hours each cycle, during which we commune with the stellar matrix.
But it is quite different from human sleep, I believe.
Marcus nodded and headed for the bathroom to change. When he emerged, he found Cathvar standing near his own sleeping area, which appeared to be a shallow depression filled with some kind of luminous gel.
The Helion was watching Marcus with what seemed like intense curiosity. Everything okay? Marcus asked.
I hope you do not mind, but I am quite interested to observe human sleep patterns.
The research materials were rather unclear about the specific mechanics of the process. Sure, I guess. But it's not really that interesting. I just kind of lie there for 8 hours. Fascinating. And you lose consciousness completely? Pretty much. Sometimes I dream, but mostly it's just blank until I wake up.
Cathvar's expression was difficult to read, but Marcus thought he detected a hint of nervousness.
And this is safe? This complete loss of consciousness? Marcus laughed. Safe? Yeah, it's perfectly safe. Humans have been sleeping for millions of years.
It's when our brains sort of reset themselves, clear out toxins, consolidate memories.
It's actually essential for survival. I see. Cathvar moved to his gel-filled depression. Well then, I shall observe from here.
Please, proceed with your normal routine. Still puzzled by his roommate's intense interest in something as mundane as sleep, Marcus climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to his chin. The room's lighting dimmed automatically, leaving only the soft glow from Cathvar's side of the room.
Good night, Cathvar, Marcus said. Good night, Marcus.
Marcus closed his eyes and let himself relax. The bed was comfortable, the room was quiet, and the gentle hum of the station's systems was almost soothing. Within minutes, he felt himself drifting toward unconsciousness. He was dimly aware of a soft gasp from across the room, but he was too tired to investigate. His breathing deepened, his muscles relaxed completely, and his conscious mind began to shut down for the night. What Marcus didn't know was that from Cathvar's perspective, he had just witnessed something that no Helian had ever seen before and lived to describe. Across the room, the young Helian sat frozen in terror, watching as his human roommate underwent a transformation that violated every principle of survival that had governed life in the galaxy for millennia. Marcus Chen, by all observable standards, was dead. His breathing had slowed to barely detectable levels. His body temperature had dropped. His muscle tone had disappeared entirely, leaving him limp and unresponsive. Most terrifying of all, his consciousness had simply vanished, leaving behind what appeared to be an empty shell. And, yet somehow, impossibly, he continued to live. Cathvar spent the next 8 hours in a state of fascinated horror, watching as Marcus's body performed maintenance functions that should have been impossible without conscious direction. The human's eyes moved beneath closed lids, his breathing occasionally shifted patterns, and his limbs twitched with what Cathvar couldn't help but interpret as the final reflexes of a dying creature. When Marcus suddenly opened his eyes and sat up as the artificial dawn began to brighten their room, Cathvar let out a sound that was part relief and part terror. "Morning," Marcus said cheerfully, stretching his arms above his head. "Sleep well?" Cathvar stared at him with wide, luminous eyes. You died." Marcus blinked in confusion. "What?" "No, I was sleeping. I told you, humans sleep for about 8 hours. But, you stopped moving. Your life signs dropped to barely detectable levels. You became completely unresponsive to your environment." Cathvar's voice was pitched higher than usual, with harmonics that suggested extreme distress. "I was prepared to call for medical assistance, but the cultural briefings warned against interfering with human customs." "Cathvar," Marcus said slowly, climbing out of bed. "Are you telling me that other species don't sleep?" "Not like that. Other species reduce their activity during rest periods, but they maintain basic awareness, basic muscle tension. They remain alive." Cathvar gestured frantically at Marcus. "What you did that was a controlled death state. How is that possible? How do you return from such a state? What prevents your body from simply remaining dead?" Marcus sat back down on his bed, beginning to understand the magnitude of the cultural gap between them. Oh, wow. I had no idea. On Earth, every mammal sleeps. Birds sleep. Even some fish sleep. It's just, this is normal on my planet. Normal? Cathvar's voice cracked slightly. "Marcus, what you just demonstrated is the most terrifying survival ability I have ever witnessed. You can voluntarily enter a state that mimics death so perfectly that even advanced sensors would register you as deceased, and then return to full consciousness and functionality at will. Do you understand what this means?" Marcus was beginning to, and the realization was both exciting and slightly disturbing. "Are you saying that humans are the only species in the galaxy that can do this?" "As far as I know, yes." most species consider consciousness to be too precious to risk, even temporarily. The idea of willingly becoming unconscious and defenseless for extended periods.
Kefvar shuddered, a rippling motion that traveled through his luminous skin.
It suggests a confidence in your survival abilities that borders on the incomprehensible. But that's not why we sleep, Marcus protested.
It's just biological necessity.
We don't choose to be unconscious and defenseless.
Don't you?
Kefvar moved closer, his large eyes fixed on Marcus with renewed interest. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. Your ancestors developed the ability to enter a death-like state on a regular basis. This suggests that either your planet was so safe that such vulnerability posed no threat, or your species was so dangerous that nothing else posed a threat to you while you were unconscious.
Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. You really think humans are that scary to other species?
Marcus, Kefvar said softly, you have just demonstrated an ability that most species would consider supernatural.
You died and returned to life as casually as changing clothes. If that is merely one of your normal biological functions. He trailed off, leaving the implications hanging in the air.
This is normal on my planet, Marcus said quietly, echoing his roommate's earlier words.
Yes, Kefvar agreed.
And that, I suspect, is exactly the problem.
What else is normal on your planet that would terrify the rest of the galaxy? Marcus didn't have an answer for that.
But, as he looked at his alien roommate's luminous, frightened features, he began to suspect that his time at Kepler Station was going to be far more complicated than he had ever imagined. Outside their window, the stars wheeled slowly past as the station continued its rotation. Somewhere among those stars were the homeworlds of thousands of species, each with their own ideas about what constituted normal behavior.
And, apparently, by galactic standards, humans were anything but normal.
Marcus Chen, engineering student and self-proclaimed average human being, was about to discover that sometimes the most terrifying thing in the universe was nothing more than a good night's sleep. Marcus spent the morning trying to convince himself that Kefvar had simply misunderstood what he'd witnessed.
After all, how could something as basic as sleep be considered extraordinary? Every human on Earth did it every single day.
It was about as remarkable as breathing or eating. That illusion shattered during his first class. Interstellar engineering was held in a massive amphitheater designed to accommodate the wildly different physiological needs of various species. Crystalline entities hung from specialized anchor points near the ceiling, while gas-based lifeforms occupied sealed atmospheric chambers along the walls. Aquatic species floated in transparent tanks scattered throughout the room, and dozens of more traditional bipedal species filled the main seating area. Marcus found a seat near the back, trying not to stare at his classmates. The professor was a zenthuri, a species that resembled a cross between a praying mantis and a computer terminal, with multiple arms that ended in delicate manipulators perfect for fine detail work. Welcome to Interstellar Engineering, Professor Zyxthala announced, her voice transmitted through the Universal Translation System. In this course, we will explore the fundamental principles that govern large-scale construction projects in the vacuum of space. But, before we begin with technical matters, I believe we have a special guest today.
Marcus looked around, wondering which distinguished expert was visiting the class. Would our human exchange student please stand? The request hit Marcus like a physical blow.
Every eye, lens, optical sensor, and photosynthetic organ in the room turned toward him. Dozens of species that had developed over millions of years on different worlds, under different stars, with different evolutionary pressures, all focused their attention on the ordinary human from Berkeley.
Reluctantly, Marcus got to his feet. Class, this is Marcus Chen from the planet Earth. As you all know, humans are one of the most recent species to achieve space travel, and their inclusion in the Confederation is still pending approval. Marcus represents the first human to attend our university.
A ripple of what Marcus hoped was polite interest ran through the amphitheater.
Several students made sounds that the translator interpreted as variations of fascinating and remarkable.
Now, Professor Zyxthala continued, I'm sure you're all curious about human capabilities, but please remember that our guest is here as a student, not a specimen.
That said, Marcus, would you mind if I asked you a few questions about human engineering approaches?
Sure, Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly.
I'd be happy to answer questions. Excellent. Now, when humans began developing space travel, how did you address the psychological challenges of extended isolation in dangerous environments? Marcus blinked. I'm sorry, could you clarify what you mean?
Well, most species require significant technological assistance to manage the stress of space travel.
Meditation chambers, communal consciousness networks, pharmaceutical interventions.
How do humans cope with the knowledge that they could die at any moment due to equipment failure, cosmic radiation, or simple mechanical malfunction?
We don't really think about it much, Marcus answered honestly.
I mean, we know space is dangerous, but we just kind of accept it as part of the job. A sound like escaping steam rose from several parts of the amphitheater.
The translator interpreted it as expressions of shock and disbelief. You simply accept it? Professor ZYX Thala's compound eyes glittered. Without any technological assistance for managing existential terror? Well, humans have always lived with the possibility of sudden death. I guess we're just used to it.
The steam hissing sound grew louder, joined by harmonic tones of alarm from some of the crystalline students. A student that looked like a mobile tree raised one of its branch arms.
Professor, is the human saying that his species evolved in an environment where death was a constant possibility? That's right, Marcus said, warming to the topic. Earth is pretty dangerous, actually. Natural disasters, predators, disease, accidents.
The average lifespan on Earth has only gotten really long in the last century or so.
How long? Asked a student whose translator voice sounded like bubbling water. About 80 years, on average. The amphitheater fell completely silent. Professor ZYX Thala made a sound that the translator couldn't interpret. 80 years? And this is considered a long lifespan? Well, it used to be a lot shorter.
A few hundred years ago, the average was probably around 40. 40 years, whispered a student that resembled a floating jellyfish.
They lived entire lives in just 40 years.
But, that's impossible, protested the tree-like student. No sentient species could develop advanced civilization with such brief lifespans. There wouldn't be enough time to accumulate knowledge, develop technology, create art.
Oh, we managed, Marcus said. Humans are pretty good at passing knowledge down through generations. And we tend to work pretty fast when we need to. Fast, Professor ZYX Thala repeated. Yes, I see. That explains much about human technological development patterns.
A crystalline student chimed in with harmonics that translated as barely contained terror.
Professor, if I may, I've been reviewing human historical records.
This species achieved powered flight and space travel within the same century.
Most species require millennia to make such advances.
That's because most species have time, Marcus explained. When you only live 80 years, and you might die tomorrow from any number of causes, you tend to prioritize getting things done quickly.
Getting things done quickly, Professor ZYX Thala mused. Class, what would you say is the most remarkable aspect of this phenomenon?
The jellyfish student's voice bubbled with what might have been awe or fear.
They developed an entire technological civilization while operating under constant time pressure and threat of death. And they did it without going extinct, added the tree student.
Most species that face such environmental pressures either develop extreme risk aversion or die out completely.
But humans did neither, the crystalline student observed. They developed a civilization that actively seeks out danger. Space travel, extreme sports, exploration of hostile environments. It's as if the constant threat of death made them more willing to take risks, not less.
Marcus was beginning to feel uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation.
We're not really that unusual. Every species must have some way of dealing with mortality. Oh no, Professor ZYX Thala said gently. Most species evolved in much more stable environments. Take the Zeltar, for example. Their crystal-based biology makes them essentially immortal unless physically shattered.
The Vorthons exist as distributed consciousness across gas clouds, making individual death nearly impossible. Even relatively fragile species like my own typically live for several thousand years.
Several thousand years? Marcus sat down heavily. The galactic average lifespan for sentient species is approximately 4,000 years, the professor explained. Humans, at 80 years, represent the shortest-lived intelligence we've ever encountered. But, then, how do you? Marcus struggled to process this information. I mean, if you live for thousands of years, how do you ever get anything done? Wouldn't you just procrastinate forever? The classroom erupted in sounds that the translator interpreted as laughter, though it came out as everything from melodic chimes to rhythmic clicking noises.
Oh, my dear student, Professor Zyxthala said warmly, that is exactly the problem.
Most species do procrastinate forever. We have students who spend decades just deciding what to study.
Research projects that continue for centuries without significant progress.
Art forms that require millennia to complete.
So when you see a species that went from inventing the airplane to landing on their moon in 66 years,
began the tree student. It's terrifying, finished the jellyfish student. The implications are staggering. If humans can make such advances in mere decades, what could they accomplish if they lived as long as we do? Or worse, added the crystalline student with harmonics of dread, what if their short lifespans are actually an advantage? What if the pressure of mortality makes them more efficient, more innovative, more driven than any of us could ever be?
Marcus looked around the classroom at dozens of beings who had lived longer than human civilization had existed, and saw something in their various optical organs that made his stomach clench with unease.
It wasn't admiration or curiosity. It was fear. Class, Professor Zyxthala announced, I think this has been an excellent introduction to one of the most important principles in interstellar engineering, the relationship between environmental pressure and technological advancement.
For homework, I want each of you to research a specific human technological achievement and analyze how their unique evolutionary pressures might have contributed to its development. As the students began to file out, Marcus remained seated, overwhelmed by the realization that everything he'd considered normal about human life was apparently unique and terrifying to the rest of the galaxy. The conversation had touched on mortality and technological advancement, but he sensed there were deeper implications that no one was quite ready to address directly. Marcus, Professor Zyxthala approached him as the amphitheater emptied. I hope you weren't troubled by our discussion. It's natural for different species to find each other's survival strategies unusual.
Professor, can I ask you something?
Of course.
How long have you been alive? Professor Zyxthala's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. I'm currently in my second millennium. Still quite young by Zenthari standards. 2,000 years.
Marcus tried to imagine living that long, accumulating that much experience, having that much time to think and learn and grow.
And you spent all that time becoming an expert in engineering? Oh no. I've only been an engineer for the last 300 years.
Before that, I was a philosopher for 4 centuries, then a musician for about 200 years, then I spent some time as a xenobiologist.
And you can just change careers like that? After hundreds of years of experience?
When you have thousands of years ahead of you, there's no rush to commit to any particular path.
Why limit yourself?
Marcus thought about human professors who spent 30 or 40 years mastering their fields, who dedicated their entire careers to understanding specific subjects because they simply didn't have time to become experts in multiple disciplines.
Professor, what would happen if humans lived as long as other galactic species?
The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her mandibles stopped clicking, and her compound eyes focused on him with uncomfortable intensity.
That's a very disturbing thought, she said finally. Humans who combined their natural drive and efficiency with millennia of time to develop their abilities?
She made a sound that the translator interpreted as nervous laughter. I suspect such beings would be quite possibly the most dangerous entities the galaxy has ever seen.
Dangerous how?
Marcus, your species went from stone tools to space travel in about 12,000 years.
Most species require millions.
If you had millions of years to develop, with your apparent immunity to boredom and your comfort with mortality.
She trailed off. Well, let's just say I'm very glad that human lifespans are naturally limited. As Marcus walked back to his dormitory, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just learned something important about humanity's place in the galaxy.
But he wasn't sure if it was something to be proud of or something to be worried about. Back in room 247C, he found Kethvar arranging some new crystalline formations that hummed with complex harmonies.
"How was your first class?" his roommate asked.
"Weird," Marcus admitted.
"Really weird. Apparently, humans are the only species that live such short lives." "Ah, you discovered the mortality differential."
"Yes, that tends to shock human exchange students.
Most species measure their lifespans in millennia rather than decades."
"Kethvar, how old are you?"
"I'm quite young, actually.
Only about 300 years old.
I won't be considered mature by Helian standards for another 2 centuries.
Marcus sat down on his bed, trying to process the idea that his roommate had been alive since before the American Revolutionary War.
"So when you look at humans, you see these creatures that live and die in what must seem like the blink of an eye." "From a temporal perspective, yes. But, Marcus, that's not what makes humans fascinating to the galactic community." "What do you mean?"
Kethvar's luminous features shifted in what Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. Most species, when faced with brief lifespans, develop what your psychologists might call conservation behaviors. They become risk-averse, focused on survival above all else.
But humans did the opposite. You developed exploration behaviors, innovation drive, artistic expression. It's as if the knowledge of mortality made you more alive, not less. I never thought about it that way.
"And that," Kethvar said, "is perhaps the most human thing of all.
You don't think about it.
You simply live as if your brief, dangerous existence is the most natural thing in the universe." Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the patterns of light play across his roommate's skin.
"Are other species afraid of us?" "Afraid? That's a complex question."
Kethvar arranged his crystalline formations with careful precision.
"Fear might be too strong a word.
But there is certainly a great deal of concern about what humans represent."
"What do we represent?" "Change, Marcus. Rapid, unpredictable change."
Most galactic civilizations have achieved stability through millennia of careful progress. The introduction of a species that can transform entire planets in mere centuries, that can develop new technologies in decades rather than millennia.
Kethvar's voice trailed off. "You think we're going to disrupt the galaxy? I think you already have, simply by existing. The question is whether that disruption will prove beneficial or catastrophic."
Marcus lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. "And my sleeping last night probably didn't help with that impression." "No," Kethvar agreed with what sounded like rueful amusement. "Demonstrating that humans can voluntarily enter death states on a nightly basis definitely added to the growing consensus that your species possesses abilities that other life forms find unsettling."
"Great. So I'm not just a student here. I'm apparently some kind of walking nightmare."
"Not a nightmare, Marcus. Perhaps more like a beautiful, terrible mystery that no one quite knows how to solve." Outside their window, the stars continued their ancient dance, unchanged by the presence of one confused human student trying to understand his place in a galaxy that found everything about his existence either fascinating or terrifying.
Tomorrow would bring new classes, new opportunities to discover just how abnormal humanity really was.
But tonight, Marcus thought, he would sleep. And, maybe, in some small way, that simple act would help the galaxy understand that humans weren't monsters or gods or incomprehensible aliens. They were just people trying to make the most of the time they had, even if that time was shorter than anyone else could imagine. Marcus thought he was beginning to understand the pattern.
Each day brought new revelations about how thoroughly abnormal humans were by galactic standards. His xenobiology class had been fascinated by human reproduction cycles.
His galactic history professor had spent an entire lecture analyzing how humans had developed agriculture in mere millennia rather than the typical 100,000 years. Even his mathematics instructor, a crystalline entity whose thought processes operated on quantum principles, had expressed amazement at humanity's ability to develop complex mathematical concepts despite their severely limited cognitive lifespan. But nothing prepared him for what happened on Thursday during basic survival skills. The class was held in one of the station's environmental simulation chambers, where different atmospheric conditions, gravity levels, and emergency scenarios could be replicated safely.
Today's lesson focused on emergency response protocols, specifically how different species should react to life-threatening situations. The instructor was Commander Vorthak, a crothery whose species had evolved from pack hunters on a high-gravity world. Tall, powerfully built, with razor-sharp teeth and claws that could cut through steel, the crothery were considered one of the more formidable species in the galaxy. They were also, Marcus had learned, exclusively carnivorous and maintained strict military hierarchies even in civilian life. Today we will practice emergency response procedures, Commander Vorthak announced, his voice a deep rumble that resonated through the chamber's reinforced walls. Each species has evolved different survival strategies when faced with immediate threats to life and limb. Understanding these differences is crucial for multi-species operations in hostile environments. The class consisted of about 30 students representing a dozen different species. Marcus had positioned himself near the back, hoping to observe rather than participate directly. After the previous day's revelation about human sleep cycles during his interspecies psychology seminar, where he'd accidentally caused 3 students to request transfers to different sections, he was trying to maintain a low profile. "We'll begin with a simple scenario," the commander continued. "Sudden atmospheric breach during a spacewalk. Who can tell me the standard Galactic Confederation emergency response protocol?" A Zenthari student raised one of her delicate manipulator arms. "Immediate cessation of all non-essential movement to conserve oxygen. Activate emergency beacon. Maintain position and wait for rescue." Correct. The key principle is conservation of resources and minimization of risk. Most species follow some variation of this protocol. Commander Vorthak's predatory gaze swept the classroom. However, different species have different capabilities in emergency situations. ZYX variant silk spinners, for example, can seal minor hull breaches with their natural secretions. Helion can enter temporary stasis to reduce oxygen consumption. Marcus nodded along, taking notes. This seemed straightforward enough. Now, the commander continued, let's examine how these protocols might vary for our human exchange student. Marcus, would you please join me at the center of the chamber? Marcus felt his stomach drop, but dutifully made his way to the front of the class. Commander Vorthak towered over him by at least 2 feet, and Marcus couldn't help but notice that those razor-sharp teeth were even more impressive up close. Marcus, suppose you were performing external repairs on a spacecraft when your suit suffered a catastrophic failure. Oxygen depleting rapidly, no immediate rescue available, hostile environment. How would you respond? Well, Marcus said, trying to think through the scenario professionally, I try to identify the source of the leak and patch it if possible. If that didn't work, I try to make it back to the airlock before my oxygen ran out. I see. And if the distance to the airlock exceeded your remaining oxygen supply? Marcus shrugged. I guess I try anyway. Maybe I could make it further than the calculations suggested, or find another way in. Commander Vorthak's expression was unreadable. You would attempt a rescue that your own calculations suggested was impossible? I mean, you never know unless you try, right? Sometimes people survive things they shouldn't be able to survive. A sound like grinding metal emanated from several of the crothery students. Marcus had learned that this was their expression of surprise or confusion. Class, Commander Vorthak announced, what Marcus has just described is a textbook example of what human military theorists call aggressive problem-solving under extreme duress. Rather than accepting the logical outcome of his situation, he would attempt to overcome it through action, even if that action appeared futile. A student that resembled a collection of floating geometric shapes pulsed with colors that the translator interpreted as deep concern. But that's completely irrational. If the mathematics indicate certain death, then attempting the impossible only wastes the remaining time that could be spent on more productive activities. Such as? Marcus asked. Recording final thoughts for posterity. Sending farewell messages to family. Ensuring that one's knowledge and experiences are properly transmitted to the species database. Making peace with one's mortality. Marcus stared at the geometric entity. You'd spend your last few minutes updating a database instead of trying to survive? Of course. Survival attempts with negligible success probability are wasteful of finite resources. But, What if the probability isn't actually negligible? What if your calculations were wrong, or circumstances changed, or you found a solution no one had thought of before? The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the environmental systems.
Marcus could see dozens of alien faces staring at him with expressions he couldn't read, but which felt distinctly uncomfortable. Commander Vorthak made a sound deep in his throat that might have been approval or concern. Marcus, you've just articulated what galactic psychologists call the human survival paradox. Your species consistently attempts rescues and survival strategies that mathematical models suggest should fail.
And, yet, statistically, humans have one of the highest emergency survival rates in the galaxy. We do?
Oh yes. When the Confederation began tracking multi-species emergency statistics, human survival rates in supposedly hopeless situations were so high that we initially suspected data corruption. The commander began pacing around Marcus like a predator circling prey.
It wasn't until we observed human emergency responses directly that we understood the mechanism.
Which is, humans refuse to accept the concept of hopeless situations. Where other species calculate probable outcomes and respond rationally, humans seem to operate on the assumption that any situation can be overcome through sufficient effort and creativity. A crystalline student chimed with harmonics of distress.
But that's impossible. Mathematics doesn't lie.
If a situation has a survival probability of 0, then it has a survival probability of 0.
That's what we thought too, Commander Vorthak replied.
Until we started examining the specific circumstances of human emergency survivals.
Class, let me share some data that might interest you.
The chamber's holographic display activated, showing a series of incident reports. Marcus read the titles with growing unease. Human survivor repairs life support system with materials not designed for that purpose.
Human crew member survives 3 weeks in space with 2 days of air.
Human engineer prevents core breach using technique considered impossible by ship's computer.
These are actual incident reports from the past year alone, Commander Vorthak explained.
In each case, the human involved faced what any rational analysis would consider a hopeless situation. In each case, they not only survived but found solutions that our best scientists couldn't replicate in laboratory conditions. Marcus raised his hand tentatively.
Maybe we just got lucky? Lucky?
The commander's laugh was like breaking stones. Marcus, the probability of this many lucky outcomes occurring randomly is so small that our statisticians refuse to calculate it.
No, this isn't luck. This is something far more significant. What do you mean?
I mean that your species appears to have evolved a survival strategy that fundamentally rejects the concept of mathematical inevitability. Where other species see impossible odds and respond rationally, humans see impossible odds and respond with aggressive problem solving.
A tree-like student rustled with what sounded like nervousness. Commander, are you suggesting that humans are somehow immune to mathematical probability? Not immune. But certainly resistant.
It appears that human psychology includes a built-in rejection of hopeless scenarios, combined with an unusual capacity for improvisation under extreme stress. Marcus looked around the classroom at faces that seemed to be oscillating between fascination and terror.
That sounds like you're saying humans are good at emergencies. Good at emergencies.
Commander Vorthak repeated the phrase with what might have been admiration.
Marcus, your species doesn't just handle emergencies well.
You seem to actively thrive in crisis situations. Most species avoid danger to preserve their limited existence.
Humans seek out danger as if it were entertainment.
We don't seek out danger, Marcus protested.
We just don't let it stop us from doing what we want to do. And what do humans want to do? I don't know. Everything, I guess?
Explore, create, build, discover, experience new things.
Despite the fact that these activities are inherently dangerous and could result in death? Well, yeah.
I mean, everything could result in death if you think about it too much.
You can't just hide from every possible risk.
The silence in the chamber was deafening. Marcus could practically feel the weight of alien attention pressing down on him as dozens of species contemplated the implications of what he'd just said.
Finally, the geometric entity pulsed with confused colors. You accept that any activity could result in death, and you proceed with those activities anyway? Of course. Otherwise, we'd never do anything. But, that's insane.
That level of risk acceptance should have led to immediate extinction.
Should have, maybe. But, it didn't.
Commander Vorthak stepped closer to Marcus, and, for a moment, the human student wondered if he'd said something wrong. The Crothery's predatory features were difficult to read, but his voice carried tones that the translators seemed to be struggling with. Marcus, what you've just described is the most terrifying survival philosophy any of us have ever encountered.
You live your entire brief existence in full knowledge that every action could be fatal, and you not only continue taking those actions but actively seek out new and more dangerous activities for recreation.
I wouldn't say we actively seek out dangerous activities. We just don't let danger stop us from living our lives.
The same thing, whispered the crystalline student. Risk acceptance as a fundamental life philosophy.
Class, Commander Vorthak announced, I want you all to consider the implications of what we've just learned.
Humans have evolved a survival strategy based on aggressive rejection of safety protocols.
They live short, dangerous lives and respond to threats not by avoiding them, but by attempting to overcome them through direct action.
It's like they're the universe's apex predators, murmured the tree student.
Worse, replied the geometric entity.
Apex predators still follow predictable patterns.
They hunt, they eat, they reproduce, they die.
These humans seem to hunt concepts.
They pursue dangerous knowledge, impossible challenges, theoretical problems that could kill them just thinking about them wrong. Marcus felt increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation.
We're not that bad. Humans are mostly peaceful. We spend most of our time doing normal things like eating and sleeping and working and raising families. Normal things, Commander Vorthak repeated. Yes, we've heard about human normal behavior. Tell me, Marcus, what do humans do for entertainment? I don't know. Watch movies, play games, read books. Sports, maybe. Sports? Yeah, competitive activities.
Running, swimming, games with balls, martial arts, extreme sports.
Extreme sports? Marcus suddenly realized he might be digging himself deeper into trouble. Well, some humans like activities with a bit more risk.
Mountain climbing, skydiving, motor racing, base jumping.
Base jumping, Commander Vorthak said slowly. For those unfamiliar with the term, this involves humans voluntarily leaping from high altitudes for entertainment purposes. With parachutes, Marcus added quickly. Safety equipment. Equipment that sometimes fails. Well, yeah, but that's pretty rare. And humans participate in these activities despite the possibility of equipment failure? I mean, the risk is part of the appeal for some people.
The chamber erupted in sounds of alarm from multiple species. Harmonic screeches, grinding metals, shocked bubbling, and colorful light displays created a cacophony that the translation system simply rendered as terror. Commander Vorthak raised one clawed hand for silence. When the noise died down, his voice carried undertones that suggested he was struggling to maintain his composure.
Class, what Marcus has just revealed is that humans voluntarily participate in activities where the risk of death is considered entertaining. They have turned the possibility of mortality into a recreational pursuit. But, that's impossible, protested the jellyfish student.
No species could evolve that level of risk tolerance. The ones who enjoyed dangerous activities would die out, leaving only the risk-averse individuals to reproduce. Unless, Commander Vorthak said quietly, the species evolved in an environment so dangerous that only individuals with extreme risk tolerance could survive to reproduce in the first place. Marcus was beginning to understand why his presence at the university was causing such widespread concern. Every time he explained something normal about human behavior, it apparently revealed another layer of what other species considered incomprehensible survival strategies. Commander, he said carefully, is there something wrong with the way humans behave? Wrong? No, Marcus. There's nothing wrong with it. But, you must understand what you represent to the rest of the galaxy. What do I represent? You represent a species that treats deadly situations as entertainment, views impossible odds as mere suggestions, and responds to mortal threats by attacking them directly. You represent beings who compressed millions of years of technological development into a few millennia through sheer refusal to accept limitations. Commander Vorthak paused, his predatory gaze fixed on Marcus with uncomfortable intensity. You represent the possibility that intelligence and extreme aggression can coexist, that a species can be both rational and completely fearless.
Do you understand why that might concern civilizations that have spent millennia achieving stability through careful risk management?
Marcus looked around the classroom at dozens of faces representing the finest minds from across the galaxy, all staring at him as if he were a particularly interesting but extremely dangerous specimen.
Am I safe to be around? He asked quietly. The question seemed to surprise Commander Vorthak. Safe? Oh, Marcus, I think you may be the safest person in this room. What do you mean?
I mean that if any of us were faced with a true emergency, a genuine threat to life and limb, you would be the one most likely to find a solution the rest of us couldn't imagine. Your species' refusal to accept defeat could very well save all our lives. The commander's expression shifted to something that might have been respect.
The question isn't whether you're safe to be around, Marcus. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for what happens when humans decide to fully engage with the wider universe.
As the class ended and students filed out in unusual silence, Marcus remained behind, trying to process everything he'd learned. He was beginning to understand that his presence at the university represented far more than a simple cultural exchange. He represented humanity's first introduction to galactic civilization, and that introduction was apparently even more dramatic than anyone had anticipated. Word traveled fast in a university community, even one spread across several levels of a massive space station. By Friday morning, Marcus discovered that his reputation had evolved from interesting exchange student to fascinating anomaly to something that felt uncomfortably close to dangerous curiosity. It started with the stairs. Walking through the corridors between classes, Marcus noticed that conversation stopped when he approached. Groups of students would pause in their discussions to watch him pass, their various optical organs following his movement with the kind of attention usually reserved for exotic predators in zoos.
Then came the requests.
His first indication that something had changed came during breakfast, when Professor Zyxthala approached his table in the common dining area. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind the interruption," the Zenthari said, her multiple arms gesturing with what seemed like nervous energy.
"I've been contacted by several colleagues in the xenopsychology department.
They're quite interested in observing some human behavioral patterns." Marcus looked up from his scrambled eggs, which the food processors had rendered into something that looked exactly like the Earth version but tasted vaguely of starlight.
"What kind of behavioral patterns?"
"Well, they're particularly interested in human responses to stress scenarios. Nothing dangerous, of course.
Just controlled observations of how humans react to problem-solving situations under pressure. I guess that would be okay. What would I have to do?" Professor Zyxthala's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was the Zenthari expression of relief. "Wonderful. They've arranged a demonstration for this afternoon in the Advanced Psychology Laboratory. Several department heads will be attending, along with some visiting researchers from other institutions. How many people are we talking about?"
"Oh, just a small gathering. Perhaps 50 or 60 of the galaxy's leading experts on sapient behavior."
Marcus nearly choked on his starlight-flavored eggs. 50 or 60 experts? To watch me solve problems? Marcus, you must understand how unprecedented this is. In all of galactic history, we've never encountered a species with human psychological characteristics. The opportunity to observe these traits directly is invaluable for our understanding of alternative evolutionary pathways. Alternative evolutionary pathways? Yes, most species evolved along similar lines once they achieved sapience. Increased risk aversion, extended planning horizons, collective decision-making processes. Humans appear to have evolved in precisely the opposite direction. You've become more risk-tolerant, more focused on immediate action, more reliant on individual initiative." Marcus put down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone. "Professor, am I some kind of experimental subject now?" "Oh no, not at all. You're a guest, a colleague. But, you're also a representative of something we've never seen before. A species that achieves technological advancement through what we can only describe as controlled aggression and systematic risk acceptance. That makes us sound like violent psychopaths. On the contrary, it makes you sound like something far more interesting. Beings who channel potentially destructive impulses into constructive problem-solving and innovation. Marcus thought about this as he made his way to his morning classes. It was true that humans had a tendency to tackle problems head-on rather than carefully planning around them. But, was that really so unusual? Apparently, yes. His advanced mathematics class provided another data point. The instructor, a gas cloud entity called Professor Wisdom of Infinite Calculations, had prepared what it described as a simple puzzle in three-dimensional optimization. The problem appeared in the air before Marcus as a complex holographic structure, a maze-like configuration that needed to be navigated by a theoretical spacecraft to reach a destination while avoiding various obstacles and minimizing fuel consumption. The standard approach, Professor Wisdom explained through harmonic vibrations that the translator converted to speech, is to calculate all possible routes, analyze their efficiency ratings, and select the optimal path. Most students require several hours to complete the calculations. Marcus studied the holographic maze for about 30 seconds, then pointed to a path that seemed to cut directly through several obstacle zones. What about that route? That route passes through sections marked as hazardous. The probability calculations indicate a 60% chance of mission failure. But, what if you could modify the ship's configuration to handle those hazards? Reroute power from non-essential systems, adjust shielding parameters, maybe use the obstacle's gravity wells to assist with navigation? Professor Wisdom's gaseous form rippled with what might have been surprise. That would require real-time modifications to spacecraft systems under hazardous conditions. No rational pilot would attempt such modifications during an actual mission. Why not? If it gets you to your destination faster and uses less fuel overall, isn't it worth the risk? But, the risk calculations are based on standard operating procedures. Change the procedures, change the risk profile. The classroom fell silent. Marcus could see other students staring at him with what was becoming a familiar expression of confused alarm. Marcus, Professor Wisdom said slowly, what you've just described is a solution that ignores safety protocols in favor of theoretical efficiency gains. I wouldn't say ignores. More like, optimizes them for the specific situation. But, optimization requires accepting risks that safety protocols are specifically designed to eliminate. Marcus shrugged. Everything has risks. The question is whether the risks are worth the potential benefits. Professor Wisdom rippled again, more violently this time. Class, what Marcus has demonstrated is the human approach to problem solving. Rather than accepting the parameters of the problem as given, humans tend to question whether those parameters can be modified to create better solutions. But, parameters exist for good reasons, protested a crystalline student. They represent the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of experience. Maybe, Marcus said. Or maybe they represent the accumulated caution of thousands of years of not wanting to take risks. The resulting silence was so profound that Marcus could hear the soft humming of the station's atmospheric processors through the classroom walls. By the time afternoon arrived, Marcus was beginning to suspect that what Professor Zyxthala had described as a small demonstration might be something considerably more significant. His first clue came when Ketvar insisted on accompanying him to the psychology laboratory. I want to observe the proceedings, his roommate explained as they made their way through the station's corridors. This is likely to be a historic moment in xenopsychology. Historic how? Marcus, you're about to demonstrate human cognitive processes to some of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy. Your performance today could influence how the Confederation views humanity's application for membership. Great. No pressure at all. The Advanced Psychology Laboratory turned out to be a massive chamber filled with observation decks arranged in concentric circles around a central testing area. As Marcus entered, he was shocked to see that every seat was occupied by beings representing dozens of different species. Cameras and sensors focused on the testing area from every angle, and the ambient lighting had been adjusted to accommodate the visual requirements of multiple types of optical organs.
Ah, Marcus, there you are, Professor Zyxthala approached from the central testing area.
I should mention that we've had rather more interest in today's demonstration than originally anticipated. I can see that. Who are all these people?
Xenopsychologists, xenobiologists, military strategists, cultural analysts, and several representatives from the Confederation Council.
Oh,
and the Terran Embassy sent an observer as well.
The Terran Embassy? I'm representing all of humanity? In a sense, yes. But try not to think about that too much. Just be yourself.
Marcus looked around at the hundreds of alien faces staring down at him and felt his stomach clench with nervousness.
Professor, what exactly am I supposed to do? We've prepared a series of scenarios designed to test problem-solving approaches under increasing levels of stress.
Nothing dangerous, just puzzles that require creative thinking under pressure.
And if I fail?
Oh, I don't think failure is possible in this context. The point isn't to succeed or fail at the puzzles themselves.
The point is to observe how humans approach problem-solving when conventional solutions aren't available.
Marcus was led to the center of the testing area, where a complex holographic interface had been prepared. Professor Zyxthala activated the first scenario, and, suddenly, Marcus found himself looking at a three-dimensional representation of a damaged space station.
You are the chief engineer on this station, Professor Zyxthala explained.
A cascade failure has begun in the main reactor system. You have 17 minutes before total containment failure results in the destruction of the station and the deaths of everyone aboard. Standard emergency protocols call for immediate evacuation, but the evacuation systems have also been damaged and can only save 30% of the station's population. Marcus studied the holographic display, noting the various system failures and available resources. Around him, he could hear the soft sounds of hundreds of beings adjusting their positions to better observe his responses.
Questions? Professor Zyxthala asked. Can I access technical manuals for the station's systems?
Yes, but each consultation takes time away from your available window.
What about the evacuation systems? Could they be repaired instead of used?
Possibly, but such repairs would require shutting down life support to several decks. Marcus nodded, his mind already working through possibilities. Above him, he could hear excited chatter as observers discussed his initial questions. He's not accepting the basic parameters of the scenario, someone commented.
Look at his biometric readings.
His stress levels are actually decreasing as the time pressure increases.
Fascinating.
Most species show exponentially increasing stress under these conditions. Marcus ignored the commentary and focused on the problem. Within minutes, he had identified a potential solution that involved rerouting power from non-essential systems to boost the evacuation capacity while simultaneously using the station's construction drones to create temporary reactor shielding. This approach, he explained to Professor Zyxthala, would save about 80% of the station's population and prevent total reactor failure. But it requires using construction drones in ways they weren't designed for, under conditions that exceed their safety ratings.
Right.
But
if the alternative is losing the entire station, isn't it worth trying? Professor Zyxthala made notes on a crystalline data tablet. And the fact that this plan has a significant chance of failure doesn't concern you?
Everything has a chance of failure. The question is whether it has a better chance of success than the alternatives. The second scenario was even more complex, involving a diplomatic crisis where Marcus had to negotiate between three alien species whose cultural requirements seemed mutually incompatible. Instead of trying to find a compromise between their existing positions, Marcus suggested a completely new framework that addressed the underlying needs each species was trying to protect. "You're changing the fundamental nature of the negotiation," observed one of the alien diplomats serving as a judge for the scenario. "I'm trying to solve the problem instead of managing it," Marcus replied. The third scenario was a military situation where Marcus was asked to defend a colony with limited resources against a superior enemy force. Again, rather than accepting the tactical constraints, he proposed a strategy that involved turning the enemy's advantages against them through deception and misdirection. "This plan requires your forces to take enormous risks," pointed out Commander Vorthak, who had apparently been invited to observe the military scenario. Smaller risks than accepting defeat, Marcus answered. By the time they reached the fourth scenario, a complex resource allocation problem involving a dying planet and limited evacuation capabilities, Marcus was beginning to understand what made his approach different. Where other species seemed to focus on optimizing within existing constraints, humans appeared to instinctively question whether those constraints were actually necessary. Marcus, Professor Zyxthala said as the final scenario concluded, "Before we end today's session, I have one more question.
In each of these scenarios, you chose solutions that other species would consider unacceptably risky. Why?"
Marcus thought for a moment, aware that his answer would be heard by some of the most influential beings in the galaxy. "I guess because I don't think accepting unacceptable outcomes is actually safer than trying to change them. If the choice is between certain disaster and uncertain success, the rational choice seems obvious."
Even when uncertain success could result in worse outcomes than the certain disaster? Maybe.
But it could also result in better outcomes.
And you never know which until you try.
The chamber erupted in sound as hundreds of alien voices discussed this statement in dozens of languages. Marcus caught fragments of translation: systematic rejection of fatalism, aggressive optimism as survival strategy, psychological immunity to despair.
Professor Zyxthala waited for the noise to die down before addressing the assembled observers. "Colleagues, what we have witnessed today is a demonstration of what human psychologists call hope as a tactical advantage.
Where most rational beings calculate probable outcomes and prepare for the most likely scenarios, humans appear to operate on the assumption that any situation can be improved through applied effort and creative problem solving."
"It's not hope," Marcus said quietly. "It's just refusal to quit."
"And that," said a voice from the observation deck, "may be the most terrifying survival trait any species has ever evolved." Marcus looked up to see who had spoken, but hundreds of alien faces stared back at him, making it impossible to identify the source of the comment. As the demonstration ended and the observers began to file out, Marcus caught fragments of conversation that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Psychological profile suggests complete immunity to despair.
Risk assessment capabilities fundamentally different from any known species. Potential for both unprecedented innovation and catastrophic disruption. Recommendation: monitor human development closely.
Kethvar joined him as the chamber emptied, his luminous features more subdued than usual.
"How do you think it went?" Marcus asked.
"I think," Kethvar said carefully, "that you have just demonstrated why the galaxy finds humans so fascinating and so frightening."
"Frightening?"
"Marcus, you just showed some of the most advanced minds in the galaxy that humans view impossible situations as merely difficult problems waiting to be solved."
"Do you understand what that means for a species that lives short, intense lives and has a proven track record of turning scientific impossibilities into routine technologies?"
Marcus looked around the empty laboratory, with its sophisticated sensors and recording equipment, all of which had been focused on documenting his every thought and reaction for posterity. "I think," he said slowly, "that I'm starting to understand why human membership in the Galactic Confederation is still pending approval."
"Yes," Kethvar agreed. "And, after today's demonstration, I suspect that approval process just became significantly more complicated."
The week following Marcus's demonstration passed in a strange haze of academic celebrity and growing unease. Students who had previously ignored him now sought him out for conversations, professors invited him to guest lectures, and research requests arrived daily from institutions across the galaxy. But, beneath the surface excitement, Marcus could sense an undercurrent of tension that seemed to be building toward something he didn't fully understand. The first concrete sign that something significant was happening came on Tuesday morning, when Kethvar woke him with news that the Galactic Confederation Council had called an emergency session.
"Emergency session about what?"
Marcus asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes.
"About humanity's membership application. Specifically, about whether humans represent an acceptable addition to galactic civilization or an existential threat to the established order."
Marcus sat up sharply.
"An existential threat? Because I solved some puzzles?"
"Marcus, you need to understand what your demonstration represented to the Council. For the first time in recorded galactic history, they witnessed a cognitive approach that fundamentally rejects the concept of acceptable losses."
"That's not just unusual, it's unprecedented. So being optimistic makes humans dangerous?" It's not optimism, and, yes, it makes humans terrifying.
Kefvar moved to the window, his luminous skin casting dancing patterns on the walls.
Most species learn to accept certain limitations as part of survival. Resource constraints, technological boundaries, social limitations. These acceptance mechanisms are what allow complex civilizations to remain stable over millennia. And humans don't accept limitations?
From what the Council has observed, humans view limitations as challenges to be overcome rather than facts to be accepted. That's a fundamentally different approach to existence, and it has implications that most galactic species find deeply disturbing. Marcus climbed out of bed and began getting dressed for his morning classes.
Kefvar, are you saying the Council is afraid that humans are too aggressive for the Confederation?
I'm saying the Council is afraid that humans might destabilize the entire galactic order simply by existing within it.
Kefvar turned from the window, his large eyes reflecting depths of concern. Think about it from their perspective.
Here's a species that went from primitive agriculture to space travel in 12,000 years, that treats mortality as an inconvenience rather than a defining limitation, and that responds to impossible problems by changing the fundamental nature of those problems.
When you put it that way, it does sound kind of scary.
Now imagine that this species, with their brief lifespans and aggressive problem-solving tendencies, begins interacting with civilizations that have spent millennia carefully balancing competing interests and managing limited resources.
How long before human solutions start undermining the social and economic structures that hold galactic civilization together?
Marcus paused in the middle of putting on his shoes.
Are you saying humans shouldn't be allowed to join the Confederation? I'm saying I understand why the Council is concerned.
The question is whether the potential benefits of human membership outweigh the risks of galactic disruption. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the station's communication system. Marcus Chen, human exchange student, please report to Conference Room Alpha immediately.
Marcus Chen to Conference Room Alpha.
Marcus and Kefvar exchanged glances.
Conference Room Alpha, Kefvar said quietly.
That's where they hold Confederation Council sessions.
Are you saying I'm being called to testify before the galactic government? I'm saying you should probably hurry.
Conference Room Alpha turned out to be a massive circular chamber located in the most secure section of Kepler Station. As Marcus entered, escorted by a silent Crothery security officer, he was overwhelmed by the scope of what he was seeing. The room contained representatives from every major species in the Confederation, arranged in concentric circles around a central speaking area.
Holographic displays showed real-time connections to dozens of homeworld capitals, allowing representatives who couldn't travel to the station to participate remotely.
At the center of it all sat the Confederation Council itself, 5 beings representing the oldest and most influential civilizations in the galaxy. Marcus recognized them from his political science courses, the ancient crystal entity known as the Archive, whose species had been recording galactic history for over 1,000,000 years, Prime Consciousness Veltar of the Helion Collective, High Admiral Zekmoth of the Crothery military hierarchy, Wisdom in Patterns, a gas cloud being whose mathematics had made faster-than-light travel possible, and Elder Rootsinger, representing the plant-based civilizations that controlled most of the galaxy's agricultural worlds. Marcus Chen of Earth, the Archive spoke with a voice like grinding stone. You have been called before this council to provide testimony regarding humanity's application for Confederation membership.
Yes, sir. Or, Your Honor. I'm not sure what the proper form of address is. Honored Archive will suffice. Now then, you have been living among various galactic species for several weeks. You have attended classes, participated in cultural exchanges, and submitted to psychological evaluation. How would you describe the human approach to interspecies cooperation? Marcus looked around the enormous chamber, acutely aware that his words might determine humanity's future in the galaxy.
I think humans are generally curious about other species and interested in learning from them. We're probably more adaptable than some species, and maybe less formal than others, but we're trying to be good members of the galactic community.
Indeed. And how do you respond to suggestions that human psychological traits pose a threat to galactic stability? I think that's based on a misunderstanding of human nature.
Yes, we're pretty good at solving problems and we don't give up easily, but that doesn't make us dangerous.
It just makes us persistent.
Prime Consciousness Veltar leaned forward, his luminous features shifting with complex emotions. Marcus, I have observed your behavior directly during your stay on this station.
You demonstrated cognitive patterns that no other species has ever exhibited.
Specifically, you appear to be psychologically incapable of accepting defeat.
I wouldn't say incapable. I just think most situations that look hopeless aren't actually hopeless. But what if they are? High Admiral Zekmotha's predatory features were unreadable. What if you encounter a situation that truly cannot be improved, where the rational response is acceptance and careful management of inevitable losses? Marcus thought about the question carefully. I guess I'd have to see the situation before I could believe it was really hopeless. And if mathematical analysis conclusively demonstrated that no solution existed? Then, maybe the mathematics were wrong, or maybe there were factors the analysis didn't account for.
The chamber erupted in sound as hundreds of representatives reacted to this statement. Marcus caught fragments of translation, systematic rejection of mathematical reality, cognitive immunity to despair, potentially destabilizing confidence levels.
Elder Rootzinger raised one branch-like appendage for silence.
When the noise died down, his voice carried harmonics that suggested deep thoughtfulness. Young human, you speak as if reality itself were subject to modification through applied effort.
This suggests a worldview fundamentally at odds with the physical laws that govern the universe.
I don't think reality can be changed, Marcus said. But, I think our understanding of reality is always incomplete, and our responses to reality can always be improved.
And, you believe this approach would be beneficial to galactic civilization?
Marcus paused, trying to find words that would convey what he was thinking without making humans sound like dangerous lunatics. I think every civilization benefits from having some individuals who question limitations and challenge accepted solutions.
Maybe humans are particularly good at that because we've had to be. Our planet was dangerous, our lifespans are short, and we've always had to innovate to survive.
But, innovation inevitably involves risk, wisdom in patterns observed, his gaseous form rippling with mathematical calculations. And, risk inevitably involves the possibility of catastrophic failure. Yes, but, avoiding all risk involves the certainty of stagnation. Some would argue that stagnation is preferable to catastrophe. Marcus looked around the chamber at beings whose species had achieved stability and prosperity through millennia of careful planning and risk management.
He could see their point of view, could understand why human